Chapter 12 of Skullface by Robert E. Howard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12 The Stroke of 5. He saw gigantic tracks of death and many a shape of doom. Chesterton. Two of the China boys squatted among the smudge fires, staring at me unwinkingly as I threaded my way among the recumbent bodies and made my way to the rear door. For the first time I traversed the corridor alone, and found time to wonder again as to the contents of the strange chests which lined the walls. 4 raps on the underside of the floor, and a moment later I stood in the idol room. I gasped in amazement. The fact that across a table from me sat Kathulos in all his horror was not the cause of my exclamation. Except for the table, the chair on which the skull-face sat, and the altar, now bare of incense, the room was perfectly bare. Drab, unlovely walls of the unused warehouse met my gaze instead of the costly tapestries I had become accustomed to. The palms, the idol, the lacquered screen, all were gone. "Ah, Mr. Costigan, you wonder, no doubt." The dead voice of the master broke in on my thoughts. His serpent eyes glittered balefully. The long yellow fingers twined sinuously upon the table. "You thought me to be a trusting fool, no doubt," he rapped suddenly. "Did you think I would not have you followed? You fool, Yusuf Ali was at your heels every moment." An instant I stood speechless, frozen by the crash of these words against my brain. Then, as their import sang home, I launched myself forward with a roar. At the same instant, before my clutching fingers could close on the mocking horror on the other side of the table, men rushed from every side. I whirled, and with the clarity of hate, from the swirl of savage faces, I singled out Yusuf Ali and crashed my right fist against his temple with every ounce of my strength. Even as he dropped, Hassim struck me to my knees, and a Chinaman flung a madnet over my shoulders. I heaved erect, bursting the stout cords as if they were strings, and then a blackjack in the hands of Ganra Singh stretched me stunned and bleeding on the floor. Lean, sinewy hands seized and bound me with cords that cut cruelly into my flesh. Emerging from the mist of semi-unconsciousness, I found myself lying on the altar with the masked Kathulos towering over me like a gaunt ivory tower. About in a semicircle stood Ganra Singh, Yar Khan, Yun Shatu, and several others whom I knew as frequenters of the Temple of Dreams. Beyond them, and the sight cut me to the heart, I saw Zuleika crouching in a doorway, her face white and her hands pressed against her cheeks in an attitude of abject terror. "I did not fully trust you," said Kathulos sibilantly, "so I sent Yusuf Ali to follow you. He reached the group of trees before you, and following you into the estate, heard your very interesting conversation with John Gordon, for he scaled the house wall like a cat and clung to the window ledge. Your driver delayed purposely so as to give Yusuf Ali plenty of time to get back. I have decided to change my abode anyway. My furnishings are already on their way to another house, and as soon as we have disposed of the traitor, we shall depart also, leaving a little surprise for your friend Gordon when he arrives at 5:30. My heart gave a sudden leap of hope. Yusuf Ali had misunderstood, and Kathulos lingered here in false security while the London detective force had already silently surrounded the house. Over my shoulder I saw Zuleika vanish from the door. I eyed Kathulos, absolutely unaware of what he was saying. It was not long until 5. If he dallied longer... Then I froze as the Egyptian spoke a word, and Li Kung, a gaunt, cadaverous Chinaman, stepped from the silent semicircle and drew from his sleeve a long, thin dagger. My eyes sought the timepiece that still rested on the table, and my heart sank. It was still 10 minutes until 5. My death did not matter so much, since it simply hastened the inevitable, but in my mind's eye I could see Kathulos and his murderers escaping while the police awaited the stroke of 5. The skull-face halted in some harangue and stood in a listening attitude. I believe his uncanny intuition warned him of danger. He spoke a quick staccato command to Li Kung, and the Chinaman sprang forward, dagger lifted above my breast. The air was suddenly supercharged with dynamic tension. The keen dagger point hovered high above me. Loud and clear sounded the skirl of a police whistle, and on the heels of the sound there came a terrific crash from the front of the warehouse. Kathulos leapt into frenzied activity. Hissing orders like a cat spitting, he sprang for the hidden door, and the rest followed him. Things happened with the speed of a nightmare. Li Kung had followed the rest, but Kathulos flung a command over his shoulder, and the Chinaman turned back and came rushing toward the altar where I lay, dagger high, desperation in his countenance. A scream broke through the clamor, and as I twisted desperately about to avoid the descending dagger, I caught a glimpse of Kathulos dragging Zuleika away. Then, with a frenzied wrench, I toppled from the altar just as Li Kung's dagger, grazing my breast, sank inches deep into the dark stained surface and quivered there. I had fallen on the side next to the wall, and what was taking place in the room I could not see, but it seemed as if far away I could hear men screaming faintly and hideously. Then Li Kung wrenched his blade free and sprang tigerishly around the end of the altar. Simultaneously, a revolver cracked from the doorway. The Chinaman spun clear around, the dagger flying from his hand. He slumped to the floor. Gordon came running from the doorway where a few moments earlier Zuleika had stood, his pistol still smoking in his hand. At his heels were 3 rangy, clean-cut men in plain clothes. He cut my bonds and dragged me upright. "Quick, where have they gone?" The room was empty of life, save for myself, Gordon, and his men, though 2 dead men lay on the floor. I found the secret door, and after a few seconds' search, located the lever which opened it. Revolvers drawn, the men grouped about me and peered nervously into the dark stairway. Not a sound came up from the total darkness. "This is uncanny," muttered Gordon. "I suppose the master and his servants went this way when they left the building, as they are certainly not here now, and Leary and his men should have stopped them either in the tunnel itself or in the rear room of young Chateau's. At any rate, in either event, they should have communicated with us by this time." "Look out, sir!" one of the men exclaimed suddenly, and Gordon, with an ejaculation, struck out with his pistol barrel and crushed the life from a huge snake which had crawled silently up the steps from the blackness beneath. "Let us see into this matter," he said, straightening. But before he could step onto the first stair, I halted him. For, flesh crawling, I began dimly to understand something of what had happened. I began to understand the silence in the tunnel, the absence of the detectives, the screams I had heard some minutes previously when I lay on the altar. Examining the lever which opened the door, I found another smaller lever. I began to believe I knew what those mysterious chests in the tunnel contained. "Gordon," I said hoarsely, "have you an electric torch?" One of the men produced a large one. "Direct the light into the tunnel, but as you value your life, do not put a foot upon the steps." The beam of light struck through the shadows, lighting the tunnel, etching out boldly a scene that will haunt my brain all the rest of my life. On the floor of the tunnel, between the chests which now gaped open, lay 2 men who were members of London's finest secret service. Limbs twisted and faces horribly distorted they lay, and above and about them writhed in long, glittering, scaly shimmerings scores of hideous reptiles. The clock struck 5. End of chapter 12.